Thomas Miller had been married to his wife, Linda, for 33 years when he made a shocking decision that would change his life forever. He walked away from his family, his home, and everything he had built to pursue a woman he believed was his soulmate. Her name was Samantha Green, or at least that's what she wanted him to believe. What Thomas didn't know was that behind the beautiful photos and tender words was not the woman of his dreams, but a man who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. Within days of arriving in California, Thomas's fantasy unraveled into a nightmare of betrayal, threats, and loss. Thomas Miller had always been known as a dependable man, the kind who never missed a day of work and never raised his voice at home. For 33 years, he lived with his wife, Linda, in a modest brick house on a quiet street in Ohio. Their children were grown and scattered across different states, busy with their own families. The once lively household, filled with laughter, arguments, and constant activity, had turned into a place of silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator or the sound of the evening news. Every morning, Thomas followed the same routine. He brewed a pot of coffee, read the newspaper, and drove to the factory where he supervised a small team. His co-workers admired him for his patience, but none of them knew about the heaviness that often followed him home. The spark in his marriage had faded years earlier. Conversations with Linda were polite but shallow, revolving around grocery lists, bills, and reminders about doctor's appointments. They slept in the same bed, but felt like strangers sharing space. Thomas wasn't an ungrateful man. He loved his family and appreciated the stability he had built. Yet, deep down, he carried a quiet longing. He watched other men his age retire to Florida, travel with their wives, or take up new hobbies with passion. Thomas, on the other hand, felt invisible in his own home. He craved adventure, someone to see him not as a tired middle-aged man, but as someone still capable of love, desire, and excitement. As the years passed, this emptiness grew heavier. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was like a slow leak draining the air from a tire. And by the time Thomas realized how hollow his life had become, he was already searching for something, anything, that could make him feel alive again. One evening, after another quiet dinner with Linda and an hour of watching television in silence, Thomas retreated to his study. He switched on the computer, more out of boredom than necessity. He had never been one for technology, but lately he found himself curious about the world beyond Ohio. On a whim, he signed up for a social networking site. The process felt strange, uploading a picture of himself, filling out details about his life, but he told himself it was just for entertainment. Scrolling through endless profiles, he noticed many seemed fake or uninteresting. Just as he was about to log off, one caught his attention. The name read Samantha Green. Her profile picture showed a woman with golden hair, a bright smile, and eyes that seemed to radiate warmth. She was listed as living in California, and her short bio mentioned a love for books, coffee, and the ocean. Something about her presence pulled him in. He hesitated, then clicked send message, writing a simple hello. To his surprise, she replied almost instantly. Her words were friendly, curious, and full of energy. She asked about his day, his work, his hobbies, and listened with an attentiveness he hadn't felt in years. That first night, they exchanged only a handful of messages, but Thomas went to bed feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The next day, he found himself rushing through his usual routine just so he could check if Samantha had written back. She had. Soon, their messages became longer, spilling into late-night conversations. The dull emptiness of his home life began to fade under the glow of his computer screen. What started as a distraction quickly became the highlight of his day, the spark that hinted at something he thought he had lost forever. Weeks turned into months, and Thomas found himself more invested in Samantha than he ever expected. Their exchanges grew intimate, not in a physical sense at first, but in the emotional bond that formed. Samantha seemed to know exactly what to say to lift his spirits. She praised his dedication to his family, admired his work ethic, and told him she wished more men were like him. For the first time in decades, Thomas felt truly seen. He would sit in the glow of the computer screen late into the night, rereading her messages with a quiet smile, feeling younger than his 61 years. Samantha often sent him photos, her on the beach with sunglasses, sipping coffee at a cafe, or posing in front of stylish boutiques. Each image fed the story he was building in his mind, a vision of the life he could have if he dared to reach for it. She told him she was lonely, that most men her age were untrustworthy or superficial. With Thomas, she felt safe. She said he was kind, gentle, and different from anyone she had ever met. The relationship quickly turned into a secret world that Thomas guarded closely. He stopped talking much to Linda, making excuses to step away from her to check his phone. At work, he would sneak into his office to see if Samantha had sent a new message. He began daydreaming about walking with her along California beaches, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. As the months passed, Samantha's influence grew. She was no longer just a pleasant distraction. She was becoming his reason to get through the day. Thomas began to believe their meeting wasn't coincidence at all. It was destiny, and he was finally being given a second chance at love. By the time spring arrived, Thomas's online affair had consumed nearly every corner of his life. The more he spoke with Samantha, the less he could tolerate the quiet, predictable routines of his marriage. He compared Linda's silence at the dinner table to Samantha's enthusiastic messages and felt an ache that grew stronger each day. What had once been tolerable now felt unbearable. He began to view his 33 years of marriage as wasted time, a prison he had unknowingly built around himself. Samantha often told him that life was short and happiness should never be postponed. She hinted at how wonderful it would be if they lived together in California, far from the dreary winters and the memories of his old life. Thomas absorbed her words like scripture. It was as though she had unlocked a part of him that had been buried under years of duty and compromise. He started to imagine himself not as an aging husband, but as a man reborn, full of possibility and desire. Eventually, the weight of his double life became too heavy. One evening, Thomas sat Linda down at the kitchen table and told her he was leaving. The words fell like a hammer, breaking the fragile peace of their household. Linda's face showed shock, disbelief, and then devastation. She asked questions he refused to answer, because the truth was too complicated and embarrassing. Friends and family were equally stunned, unable to understand why a man so loyal for decades would walk away without warning. But Thomas's mind was already in California. He emptied part of his retirement account, packed his belongings into 2 suitcases, and booked a one-way ticket to the West Coast. As the plane took off, he told himself this was not an ending, but a beginning, the start of the love story he had been waiting for all his life. California greeted Thomas with sunshine and palm trees, a world so different from the gray skies of Ohio. As he stepped out of the airport, he felt a rush of energy he hadn't experienced in years. Everything looked alive, the buzzing traffic, the tall buildings, the distant hills shimmering in the afternoon light. He was no longer just a factory supervisor from a small town. Here, in this new place, he was a man on the verge of love, ready to step into the life he believed was waiting for him. He checked his phone as soon as he collected his luggage. Samantha had sent him a message apologizing for not being able to meet him at the airport. She claimed there was a sudden family emergency, but promised she would make it up to him. Instead, she gave him an address and assured him that their meeting would be unforgettable. Thomas read the message twice, convincing himself it was a minor setback. After all, love was never without complications. He rented a car, chose the best shirt from his suitcase, and drove through the busy streets with a nervous excitement. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding as he imagined the moment she would walk into his arms. Every traffic light felt like an obstacle keeping him from the happiness he had longed for. He pictured her waiting with that bright smile from her photos, ready to welcome him into a new chapter of life. As he approached the address, his excitement only grew. He rehearsed in his head what he would say when they finally met. For Thomas, the drive wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was the journey toward the dream he had risked everything to chase. The GPS led Thomas through unfamiliar streets until he arrived at a neighborhood far different from what Samantha had described. Instead of ocean views and palm-lined avenues, he found himself parked in front of a weathered apartment complex with peeling paint and broken railings. The courtyard was quiet, littered with bicycles and discarded furniture. For a moment, he thought he had typed the wrong address. But the message on his phone was clear. This was the place. Carrying his suitcase and a nervous smile, Thomas climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. His pulse raced with anticipation. He knocked softly, rehearsing the embrace he had imagined countless times. The door opened, but the figure standing there froze him in place. Instead of the young, blonde woman from the photographs, a tall man in his 30s stood before him. His hair was dark, his frame broad, and his expression unreadable. Thomas's stomach dropped as reality hit him. The dream unraveled in an instant. He stumbled over his words, asking if Samantha was there. The man's response was calm but devastating. He introduced himself as Samuel. There was no Samantha. She had never existed. The woman Thomas had fallen in love with, the one he had left his wife and home for, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. The truth settled over him like a heavy fog. The photos, the sweet words, the promises of a new life. It had all been lies designed to lure him in. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, torn between disbelief and humiliation. His heart, once filled with hope, now felt crushed under the weight of betrayal. What he had believed was destiny was nothing more than a cruel trick, and the stranger before him held the answers to everything. Thomas stepped inside the apartment, his mind reeling, his body moving as if on autopilot. The place was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight, and the air heavy with the smell of stale cigarettes. Empty bottles and crumpled takeout bags were scattered across the floor. Nothing about the room matched the glamorous image Samantha had painted of her life. Samuel sat on a worn couch and gestured for Thomas to do the same. With a cold expression, he explained how the fantasy had been built. Samantha was nothing but a mask, a collection of stolen photos and carefully written messages designed to lure lonely men like Thomas. As Samuel spoke, Thomas realized the depth of the deception. Every affectionate message, every photo, every promise had been part of a calculated scheme. Worse still, Samuel admitted that Thomas wasn't the first. There were others, men who had lost far more than just pride. Some had emptied savings accounts. Others had sold property, all convinced they were helping a woman who loved them. The charm, the urgency, the constant pleas had been rehearsed and perfected over years. Thomas's heart sank when Samuel reminded him of the money he had already sent during the months of their relationship. Small amounts at first, then larger sums for emergencies and rent. Now Samuel wanted more. His tone grew sharper, no longer pretending to be sympathetic. He hinted that if Thomas refused, there would be consequences. He knew where Thomas was staying, he said. He knew details of his life Thomas had carelessly shared during their long conversations. Fear clawed at Thomas's chest. The dream of love had twisted into something dangerous, and he realized he was trapped in a stranger's web. The man who had once promised him happiness was now holding him hostage with threats and demands. Thomas left the apartment in a daze, his suitcase still dragging behind him, his heart pounding with the weight of betrayal. The streets of California, once glowing with promise, now felt hostile and suffocating. Every stranger's glance made him uneasy. Every sound behind him set his nerves on edge. He checked into a small motel that night, but sleep never came. Instead, he replayed every moment of the past year, realizing how carefully Samuel had woven the trap and how willingly he had stepped into it. The next morning, with trembling hands, Thomas walked into a nearby police station. Reluctantly, he explained everything, from the online messages to the photos to the threats. The officers listened carefully, their faces showing no surprise. They had heard stories like his before. They assured him an investigation would begin immediately, and Thomas soon learned he wasn't alone. Samuel was part of a larger network that had been scamming older men for years, using stolen identities and emotional manipulation to strip victims of their money and dignity. When Samuel was arrested weeks later, Thomas felt no triumph. The damage had already been done. His marriage was gone, his savings diminished, and his reputation in shambles. Linda did not answer his calls, and his children kept their distance. The people he loved most could not understand how he had thrown everything away for a fantasy. Alone in his empty Ohio home, Thomas was left with nothing but regret. The story of his downfall spread quietly among neighbors and relatives, whispered as a warning. For Thomas, it was a painful reminder that loneliness can make even the most sensible person vulnerable to illusions. What he thought was love had been nothing more than a lie, and the cost of believing it was a life that could never be repaired.